The number one sign for depression is lack of maintaining hygiene and personal care needs is usually the first one. And secondly is nutrition. People not eating, not getting out to the store to get the food they need. Those are two of the biggest signs of depression that I have seen in the people that I have worked with. As people tend to isolate and not reach out for help, the depression definitely does increase. And as depression increases, they typically are not taking care of themselves, and it becomes just a slippery slope.
Welcome back to This Day and Age, where we continue to bring together experts in all things aging, providing vital information to help you and your loved ones make confident decisions while navigating life's journey. And I'm your host, Phil Tower. It's a lot of fun to be with you on every episode of This Day and Age. And, you know, we've covered a lot of misconceptions in almost all of our episodes, and it's very common misconception that older adults live a pretty carefree, simple life. They have that post-retirement bliss where stress and anxiety, well, those are things of the past. However, statistics and reality show a much different story. As people get older, certain life events and changes can definitely impact their mental health in a number of ways. That's why we brought our guest on this episode in to talk about those issues. Hope Huizinga is a transition navigator with Reliance Community Care Partners as we talk about a very big topic, that is mental health and aging. And Hope, I'm really glad you're here, first of all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You have been with Reliance Community Care Partners for some time. I love the title, you are a transition navigator. When you went to college, did you ever think you were going to be a transition navigator?
I did not. I only thought I'd just be a social worker.
Well, you know, and it's a great title because life throws at you a lot of transitions, and few of them are as big as when you retire and then look at, you know, the latter part of your life, whether you're 70 and older or 80 and older, and defining old age. We could do a whole episode on that. So I want to ask you about that and your role as a transition navigator, if you talk about that, and a little about your background, how you came to Reliance Community Care Partners. And then I think our listeners are probably wondering about what you do and what Reliance Community Care Partners does. So let's start with you. What's your background in?
So I graduated from Calvin with a bachelor's in social work, Grand Valley with a master's in social work. Started my career back in the day in 2007, working with older adults with severe and persistent mental illness, and then adults with developmental disabilities. And I came to Reliance about 9 years ago through Network 180 when we had the case management program for older adults. And then I have also done Medicaid waiver and now transition navigation.
And Reliance Community Care Partners is what kind of an organization?
So it's been around since about 1979. It is a nonprofit, and we work in the community with families, informal supports, and our clients to assist them with accessing services and making sure that they are living meaningful and productive lives. The services that Reliance offers is Care Resources, which is a PACE program. The Reliance Wellness Clinic addresses the behavioral health. Kent County Senior Millage and Medicaid waiver address care in the home, and also for Medicaid waiver can assist with paying over and above care for adults in assisted living facilities. And then the nursing facility transition program, which is what I do here currently.
Okay. You know, social worker, it's a very noble, very needed calling. Yet you work with older adults and mental health issues. Was that something you were drawn to, or just curious how you got there?
Basically, I thought I was going to, of course, want to work with children and families because that's what you think. But with my first job out of my master's was at Gerontology Network. And I also did direct care at a nursing home for a little while I finished up my master's, and just really enjoyed older adults. And I have made sure to stay with that population since 2007 to now.
And that's great. And you can learn a lot from older adults. You've been a transition navigator with Reliance Community Care Partners for some time. I bet you see a lot. What are you seeing? Just if I was to say to you, the state of older adults, you work in the Kent County or multiple county area, right?
For community mental health, I only ever covered Kent County.
So what are you seeing in your role?
So what I've been seeing is an increase of depression, isolation, and loneliness among our elderly population, which increases their isolation, and accessing services has been more difficult for them. I think it's just a population that gets overlooked quite a bit in our society. And
do they take it seriously? They meaning the older adults you work with. I think, especially when you deal with adults who have been taught growing up, you just tough it out. You can get through this.
Correct.
And it's not cool to rely on, or it's not needed to rely on outside people and outside help. There's a lot of stubbornness, especially as you age. And I'm guessing you might see a good deal of that in your day-to-day work.
I do. You are correct in that. I do have several clients that have said that they don't want to ask for help. They feel like they should be able to be independent and not need services in place in the home, or are just feeling like they're bothering you if they ask. Or I even see it in nursing facilities, like people not asking even the caregivers to help them because they have a feeling that they need to be independent. And it's just very frustrating for a lot of older adults to come to the realization that they're not going to be able to be autonomous completely as they get older, because things change, cognition changes, health needs change, and finances.
And there's no shame in that asking, that reaching out. I mean, that's got to be a big part of your message.
It is, and I would agree with that. I have done that a lot of times for people that have declined services, still giving them a card and just saying, please reach out when you feel like you are ready to ask or need help, or just can't go on any further on your own.
It's hard to talk about loneliness because, first of all, nobody wants to admit they're lonely, whether they're 45 or 85. And I just wonder how you're seeing that, and what the older adults you work with as Transition Navigator, what they're telling you. Is there a willingness to talk about, hey, I'm seeing you, Hope, I haven't seen anybody else in a while? I mean, that's a tough thing.
For Transition Navigation, it's a little different because they're in nursing facilities in order to access our services.
Okay.
But as far as the clients that I've had in the community, yes, sometimes I am the only face that they've seen on a regular basis. And while I'm there, it's just trying to access or get them to access services, to reach out, to connect them to the community, such as day programming, transportation, meals. Just their basic needs are what a lot of older adults are not even meeting nowadays.
And we've talked about in previous episodes how loneliness and depression, as prevalent as they are in older adults, they also can lead to cognitive decline as well, which I think a lot of people don't make the connection. Fair enough?
Fair enough. And I have seen that as well. As people tend to isolate and not reach out for help, the depression definitely does increase. And as depression increases, they typically are not taking care of themselves. And it just becomes just a slippery slope to where eventually it gets to a point where hopefully family or informal support will step in if they don't have family. And usually that results then in an ER visit and usually a nursing home placement for rehab.
Hope Huizinga is with us on this episode of This Day and Age. Hope is a transition navigator with Reliance Community Care Partners here in West Michigan. As we talk about mental health and aging, 1 in 5 adults over 55 are experiencing some type of mental health concern, depression being the most prevalent. And depression can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. I bet you see that on a regular basis, including a lot of people, if you ask them, will say, I'm not depressed, but you might be seeing some telltale symptoms. And can you help us understand, help our listeners understand how you can kind of be on the lookout for an older adult, maybe a relative, who may be depressed?
I would say the number one sign for depression is lack of maintaining hygiene and personal care needs is usually the first one. And secondly is nutrition. People not eating, not getting out to the store to get the food they need. I would say those are two of the biggest signs of depression that I have seen in the people that I have worked with.
And how do you connect with them so they finally say, you're right, I need to get help with this? How do you make that light bulb go on in their head?
Well, it definitely depends on the individual client, but a lot of times I just explain to them that I'm not here to judge. I'm here from a human being to a human being to just make sure that you're okay and that we can make sure you have the food that you need, a caregiver coming in potentially through waiver or senior millage. But the biggest thing is just for people to know that when we come in as professionals, there is no judgment and it's genuine caring, I think, is the biggest piece of getting them to access services.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, though, the stubborn ones who say, I don't need you, Hope, and they just kind of shoo you out the door. You probably see that a lot. Do you have a secret weapon for dealing with the stubborn ones that you know really need your services?
I don't. It's usually just leaving them my number and hoping that they call when they are ready to access services. It just kind of depends if there's a court order for treatment or not, too. So for people with mental health, but typically it's letting them access or coming to me once they're ready.
You mentioned something about adults in a senior care facility. You know, we were talking about loneliness, where you would assume, okay, they're in a senior care facility, so they're seeing nurses, they're seeing other professionals, maybe PT and OT, maybe other residents, but I would assume you can definitely have loneliness and depression inside a facility like that as well, too.
Yes, you are correct, because even though older adults can be surrounded, at a nursing facility, assisted living with residents and caregivers, a lot of times it's still not their home. It's not their family. It's not maybe their pets, because you can't have them in those places. So a lot of older adults still experience loneliness and isolation and depression in facilities, or they just don't come out to the community meal or don't want to participate in the activities and just decide to lay in their beds and not do anything.
Yeah, which has got to be really frustrating when you want to help those people. And, as we look at this whole idea of mental health and getting older and aging in America, I think a lot of people listening to us, whether they're 35 or 45, would say, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm not going to be that isolated, lonely person. I've got a big family. I've got this or that. But life can throw a lot of different curves at you. Do we know if there's some other contributing factors that lead to mental health decline, depression, loneliness, the common issues or creators of those conditions?
I would say definitely the other issues can be barriers, or transportation is a huge barrier for people, because it kind of goes with like having a fixed income as well for people if they don't have pensions or life insurance from a spouse that passed away, where they can't even pay to get the Go bus. Now, RideLink is donation only, but it's $4 away, which can be a lot for an older adult with not much coming in but Social Security. And also, there's not as many day programs offered as there used to be back in the day for older adults for socialization. And
I want to stop you there. Why? Why is that a thing?
I am not sure why there's just not, but there used to be, like way back in the day, there used to be, seem to be more day programs. And then even with like now there are senior centers, but they got to be able to get to the senior center.
Yeah.
So
transportation is a big issue.
Transportation, I'm going to say, is the biggest barrier in about everywhere.
Not just not having a car, but being able to access transportation because they're on a really restricted budget.
Correct. I would agree that they might have a car but can't pay to get it fixed or even have put gas in it. It just depends.
And I think a lot of this, as we look at becoming older, your empty nesters, your kids maybe don't reach out as much as you would like them to. That definitely contributes to that loneliness. Or the kids are across the country or across the world, relatives who passed away, or they're not as social as maybe families were 1 or 2 or 3 generations ago, which is certainly a thing. But do you see that contributing to the people you work with?
I do. I think there are probably more older adults with children that do not live locally, and then older adults and accessing technologies to, say, do FaceTime or Skype or Zoom or whatever. A lot of people get really confused with that, or again, you can't afford it. So a lot of times too, it comes down to money, as you can see, but just a phone call from a family member or even a friend or anything it means a lot, but probably just doesn't happen as often as it should, maybe, would be my guess. But I would say technology has made things more difficult for older adults. I mean, you can't even necessarily pick up a phone and dial. A lot of things are cell phones, and they're getting smarter than people by the day. So,
yeah, there is a barrier there, especially when we live in such a tech-dominated world. Hope Huizinga is with us. She is a Transition Navigator with Reliance Community Care Partners as we talk about mental health and aging. And there's a lot to unpack here, but you have really made a common theme here, which is a big challenge, and that is people who are on a limited income or didn't save enough money, didn't realize all the things that were going to be more. And Hope, you and I haven't even talked about the housing crisis that's prevalent all across the country, if not the world, and it's certainly a big deal in West Michigan, where I know people who are paying $2,000 a month for rent in small homes, and let alone seniors living on a fixed income. It's a fortunate thing if they're able to pay off their mortgage and not have, if they're living at home, but if they're living in a skilled nursing facility or any other kind of facility where they've got a monthly rent payment or care payment, that can be a huge challenge.
I would agree with that. So depending on location, the average wait time for low-income senior housing subsidized is usually about 1 to 5 years. Wow. And then, of course, when an apartment becomes available, their patient pay, their Social Security has been going to the nursing facility, and they get $60 a month for spending. So that can always be hard, trying to figure out, when somebody can move and afford that, but then making sure once they're in an apartment, they can afford the rent, the food, and be able to have access to others that, so they're not isolating in their apartment and not taking care of themselves.
We've talked about this avalanche of aging that's happening. The boomers are obviously getting older, and we're going to reach a point very soon where 65 and olders will be a greater number than those 18 and older. I'm just curious, and I'm scared for the answer, so don't scare me too much here, Hope.
Okay.
Are we ready for the future here in Michigan, in West Michigan? I'm getting a sense like we have not even seen the tsunami that's coming for us.
We haven't, and unfortunately, over COVID, a lot of things closed. For example, I would say about half of adult foster care homes closed over COVID due to lack of caregivers and just various things. And then as housing keeps being built, I don't think enough low-income subsidized housing is being put into place for people. And then also the other crisis with public housing is in older adults is going to be bed bugs. So there's just a lot going on. And then, of course, bed bugs isolates them again, causing the depression and decline. And caregivers can't come in when there's bed bugs. And it just, a lot of things with older adults can be very cyclic.
And as this continues, there will be an obvious need for a lot more Hope Huizingas out there. I want to talk about ageism and the impact it's having on people trying to get services. We make a lot of assumptions about people, especially about older people, things that are not true. But I would like to get your opinion, Hope Huizinga, on how ageism and just a lot of stereotypes about those who are older adults, those adults who might be living in a senior community, misconceptions, prejudging them. Are you seeing this as a problem?
Yes, it's more like I think we feel like if somebody is in a nursing facility or a senior care community, that all of their needs are being met, and that might not necessarily be true, because maybe the basic needs are, but not the emotional, psychological, mental health needs of the person are being addressed. And I also think that older adults can be stereotyped as that they just want to be left alone because they've lived their life. They're older, they're retired, like just, and just overlooked,
right,
even in neighborhoods and just things like that.
Yeah, except one of the very common themes we've talked about on many of the episodes of This Day and Age, the fact that older adults are not living as older adults did 25 and 35 years ago. They're way more active. They're going on trips, they're going to concerts, they're running marathons. They're doing a lot more. But I'm just curious how big of a problem this is in terms of ageism, the misconceptions, even the care providers or people providing services. Like you said, just say, well, they're happy to live on their own. They're retired, they've kind of got their routine down. I shouldn't worry about that. But I would think a little bit of personal probing, kind probing is necessary, right? I can see that smile on your face. You do have to go there.
So I would agree with that. And I am one of those people who will probe and ask questions and make sure that people are okay. Can ask some of the older neighbors in our neighborhood.
That's all right.
But I do think that older adults are also living longer and having more comorbidities because they're living longer. As far as the ageism, I think the biggest thing is going to be educating. If people like baby boomers, like for example, like my parents educated me on taking care of others, and like I think it's got to come from in the home as to how we address older adults and how we see them, and just making sure, for example, like our kids know that you have to value older adults, you need to help people, but we also try to do that through example as well. And not just, grandma and grandpa are just getting forgetful, like let's just not call them, ignore them, because you hear the same story over again. Like it is what it is. You have to just accept that and go on. And I always feel like, the most important thing is, how would we want to be treated when we're that age, when we're in our 70s, 80s, 90s? I mean, I don't want to be left alone. Keep bothering me.
Nobody wants to be left alone. Do you realize how powerful that was, what you just said? There are parents listening to this who will probably say, can I hire you, Hope, to come into my home or speak to my grandkids about this? Because we know historically there are countries all around the world where older people are revered, respected. They're held up as some of the greatest treasures in a country, in a community, in that society, in that culture. And we fail to do that in this country because we're all about all for me, all now, as quick as I can get it. And what else is there for me after I've acquired everything else I can? I'm so glad you said that, because, there are a lot of people looking at this saying, what is my older life going to be like? What is my life in my 70s and 80s going to be like? And it does start with the kids. It's pretty simple wisdom and pretty powerful stuff, but you've got to keep repeating that message, right?
I would agree. For example, where you would go like socialize, say, even for church, like just making sure you acknowledge the older adults and say hi, say good morning if nobody is speaking to them, and just anywhere that would be, I guess, like a normal place that you would go, and just being friendly, being that face and making sure. But again, I know that because I've been working in this field for 16 years, and know what loneliness and isolation can do to a person. But I also know, as much as informal supports and family members may not come around, we still have to be careful with judgment because we never have known the dynamics of growing up. I do know that too with some people that I have on, some of my clients, like as far as the kids not coming around and stuff. Like, we don't know those dynamics as they grew up either.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, I'm going to give you the floor. I'm going to give you this opportunity to speak to that person on the other end listening to us on this podcast who has been secretly suffering. They're an older adult. They're secretly suffering. They might be depressed. They might be painfully lonely. And they're hearing you and they want to know, Hope, what can I do? Speak to them if you would. What wisdom would you share with them about getting help and their fear of reaching out?
Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Definitely, you can call. There's Area Agency on Aging and then Reliance Community Care Partners, where they have the Kent County Senior Millage can assist and the Medicaid waiver. But also, if you feel like you would benefit from counseling or medication management, there's the wellness clinic for Reliance. And then also for family members of loved ones in a nursing facility, if you feel like their needs could be met elsewhere, Transition Navigation assists people with getting back out into the community with services in place. There is the 211 line, but also know that their senior neighbors can assist. There is the Wyoming Senior Center, and the senior neighbors in Granville have some stuff during the day. Just don't be afraid to reach out, and feel free to access services to call Reliance Community Care Partners at 616-956-9440 and request the intake department. And also, if you do call and are interested in PACE program at Care Resources, our intake department can get you to them as well.
I think the most important thing you said is there are a ton of resources out there. It's easy to make the assumption that I can't get that care or it's too expensive. That is a bad assumption to make. We do have a senior millage in this county, in Kent County,
correct,
where we are having this conversation right now. And it has afforded a lot of services for people, for older adults living in this county. And it's really important our listeners are aware of that, for themselves, for their parents. And real quickly, that was for the person who was feeling depressed, lonely, had some mental health struggles. What about this is the tough one. I'll save the last question, the hardest one for you. What about trying to get help for your parents who are maybe more stubborn than you wish they were? What would you tell those older adults with older parents in terms of getting help for their parents?
I guess it would just depend all on the approach. It would depend on what the needs are for those parents. But I would explain to them that it's just come time, unfortunately, that in the aging process where maybe living alone or not having any help come in during the day is not safe. And if they live in their own home, that if they don't want to receive these services, they could potentially end up in a supervised setting or the ER. It just depends. So I would just encourage them that really you're trying to assist with their independence in the community and just see how that goes.
Yeah, I think there's a little nugget in there was really wise, which was you might want to paint a picture for them what would happen if they didn't ask for help and they didn't think about those things. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Hope Huizinga is a transition navigator with Reliance Community Care Partners, and I can tell you're really good at what you do. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
And I know our listeners do as well. Well, we want to encourage you to tune in to our future episodes of This Day and Age as we will continue to dive into this issue of aging and navigating life as an older adult and as a older child with older parents. There's all kinds of things to learn about and things we've already shared with you. Of course, be sure to check out our other episodes at thisdayandage.org. That's thisdayandage.org for our past episodes. And we want to encourage you to subscribe and share with your family members and friends this podcast and all of our episodes of This Day and Age so they too can stay informed and make confident decisions as they age. And once again, for This Day and Age, I'm Phil Tower. Thank you so much for listening.